So air pollution has been, and climate change, by the way, has been on the news almost every day, and is certainly a problem that we are more and more alert to, and more understanding and trying to understand how much it can actually impact people's lives and how much it can impact, particularly in our case, specifically looking at the impact on cardiovascular disease. We know today, if we look at the mortality risk factors, and if we divide them in metabolic risks, environmental and occupational risks, and behavioral risks, we have here air pollution as the number 4, as an important component of the mortality risk factors, together also with non-optimal temperature, and then of course unsafe water sanitation and so on. So air pollution representing very high on the ranking of mortality risk factors. Today we have enough evidence, and this is data coming from WHO, that shows that air pollution is the world's largest single environmental health risk. About 7 million people die every year because of air pollution, and 50% of those die from heart disease and stroke. According to WHO, air pollution is responsible for about 1/4 of all deaths from cardiovascular disease, from heart disease, and about 24% of all deaths from stroke. And when we talk about air pollution, we're talking about outdoor, but also indoor air pollution. Specifically looking at outdoor air pollution, 9 in 10 people live in places where air quality levels exceed the recommended limits. There are different sources of outdoor air pollution, from industry and energy supply, dust, transportation, waste management, agricultural practices, and so on. But also indoor air pollution is an important element, and about 3 billion people cook using polluting open fires or stoves fueled by kerosene and solid fuels. And in poorly ventilated dwellings, indoor smoke can be 100 times higher than the acceptable levels. So it is calculated that about 3.8 million people die every year from illnesses that can be attributable to household air pollution. And about 45% of these deaths, they are due to either heart or stroke, meaning cardiovascular disease. So here you have the breakdown of the deaths linked to outdoor and household air pollution. As I mentioned, about 7 million, and you can see here the breakdown, about 34% from ischemic heart disease and about 20% from stroke, so more than half due to cardiovascular disease. This is, again, demonstrating that the correlation between air pollution and cardiovascular disease air pollution is a major contributor to this global burden of disease, again, with an estimated 12% of all deaths in this is data coming from 2019. And you can see here that it's divided on the susceptible hearts, vulnerable, and both. So the susceptible will be those who are at a higher risk of cardiovascular events for a given level of pollution exposure. The vulnerable are the ones that are exposed to elevated levels of air pollution, and both, they basically fall into both of these groups. And if we detail here, we can see basically what it represents, each one of them, and how much that can actually affect different populations across the world. Now, one important piece of data shows that there is a rising deaths attributed to air pollution. And if we look at the impact in low and high-income countries, the impacts are felt more strongly in low and middle-income countries than in high-income countries. So the number of air pollution-related deaths is rising over time and is rising in a more steeper way in low-income countries. So it's really, although it's a global problem, but again, as we have seen in other circumstances, here also is affecting more low and middle-income countries. So how much do we know about the factors that can contribute to these cardiovascular risks of climate change? Well, we know today that due to global warming and a series of heat events, they basically expose, due to air pollution, also the fact that we have an aging population, a vulnerable population, with also some socioeconomic status. This has an impact in terms of the health effects on the cardiovascular system, and particularly in the heart. There is awareness today of the multi-organ effects of air pollution, and this is growing. And although the weight of evidence varies between the different organ systems that can be affected, it is particularly strong for cardiovascular effects. And you see here that air pollution can actually impact in different organ systems, but particularly the cardiovascular system is significantly affected. So we have three phases, and if you look at the inhalation of pollutants and the transmission to the cardiovascular system, we know that some gases, such as the ozone, they exert the majority of these effects in the upper airways. Other pollutants, such as nitrogen dioxide, fine particles, they can actually reach the sacs of the lung, and many of these can actually induce inflammation, oxidative damage in the lung, and these mediators will pass into the circulation and will cause several adverse effects on the cardiovascular system. And there is increasing evidence that these small particles can also pass into the circulation and then having an impact on the cardiovascular system. The phase 3, it's at the level of the cardiovascular system. These air pollutants, they have a dizzying array of actions by which they impair cardiovascular function. This will include impact in terms of contraction, stiffening of the arteries, as well as a decrease in the ability of the blood vessels to relax. So there is an impact in terms of endothelial function. There is an increase in blood pressure, changes in heart rhythm and heart rate. And there is an increased susceptibility of the heart to ischemic damage. There is also increased coagulability, inflammation of blood vessels, acceleration of the growth and development of atherosclerosis, increased vulnerability of atherosclerotic plaques, making them more likely to rupture, and therefore conditioning acute coronary syndromes. Here we have summarized, and again, the whole mechanisms underlying the cardiovascular adverse effects due to air pollution. So the exposure of air pollution, as I've mentioned, and these nanoparticles in air pollution, again, entering the pulmonary circulation directly, and then they can reach the cardiovascular system and therefore exerting the detrimental effects by having increased thrombus formation, dysrhythmias, increased platelet aggregation and impaired fibrinolysis, and also inducing endothelial and vasomotor dysfunction, therefore with all these different cardiovascular adverse effects that are nowadays demonstrated. This slide shows how it, and this is a document that was produced by WHF, also in disseminating this message and in simple words, demonstrating how air pollution can actually affect the heart, and basically saying that in a simple language, how these particles can actually travel into the bloodstream, can damage the vessel wall, and can evolve into the different potential complications and cardiovascular effects that it can provide. And then, of course, the phase 4 are the changes in the cardiovascular function that can lead to a cardiovascular event as we know it. And here we have basically the biological mechanisms by which these different pollutants can cause cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, as I've just mentioned. With this taking this into account, the World Heart Federation, together with our strategic partners, we produced already several documents calling the attention to this problem. This is a document that was produced a couple of years ago, and these are some of the papers that have been produced together with some of them together with our strategic partners like ACC, AHA, and DSC, again, promoting and taking and calling to action, a call to action to take a stand against air pollution. I don't have the time to go into all the details, but in this document shows also what can be done to reduce the risk. Of course, there are some aspects that are related with the individual, other aspects related with the communities, with the cities, with the governments, with policies, and of course, policies and investment here are fundamental to have a real impact. But there are also things that can be done by the individual to somehow reduce the risk of the consequences of air pollution. So I would say, by concluding, that addressing this challenge, what is the role of cardiac organizations, societies, and foundations? And I will summarize by saying that by advocating further research on cardiovascular disease and air quality, and there are some ongoing studies, disseminating these findings to our memberships and via other activities such as the World Heart Day can be a way to show and increase the awareness of this problem, educate and raise awareness among healthcare providers on the importance of reducing air pollution and the cardiovascular benefits of air pollution mitigation, and finally, to increase the development and use of clinical guidelines on air pollution and cardiovascular disease, such as some of the statements that have been produced by us. So thank you so much for your attention.